Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our webinar, How to Apply for British Nationality. My name is Simon Lawson and I'm Chief Executive at Citizens Advice Richmond. This is one of a series of webinars and other activities that we offer funded by Richmond Council to help EU citizens deal with Brexit and the aftermath. We also offer presentations, talks and one-to-one advice. So I'm now going to hand over to our expert advisor to begin the presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mike Harron and I'm the EU caseworker at Citizens Advice Richmond. My job is to advise EU citizens and their families on the settled status scheme and other related matters of interest, such as today's talk, How to Become a British Citizen. My post is funded by Richmond Council. I'm going to look at three subjects. First of all, is the EU citizen already a British citizen? This will mostly apply to children, but not necessarily, because of course adults could have been in the UK since 1973 when we joined the EU, or even before that date. Secondly, I'm going to look at the question of registration of children as British citizens. And then finally, I'm going to look at the question of adults becoming British citizens, which is called naturalization. So the first thing I'd like to look at is the question of are you already a British citizen? And this will be by birth in the UK. Now, most countries now do not have a rule that anybody born in that country is automatically a citizen. And we changed our law as far back as 1983. So if, for example, you have children here, you're EU citizens, the child was born in the UK, the child is not necessarily, just by that reason, a British citizen. Now, some children born in the UK to non-UK parents will in fact be British. Obviously children of British citizens, but also the child has a parent who has indefinite leave to remain. This sometimes causes confusion. I'll simply say that the British did not give EU citizens indefinite leave to remain after 2006. So if you came to the UK after that date, you don't have indefinite leave to remain. Secondly, you have to apply for it. So if you haven't applied for something called indefinite leave to remain, you haven't got it. And finally, you will either have a card or a stamp in a passport that uses those words. So it's quite rare that a minority of EU citizens will have indefinite leave to remain. And then finally, settled status, which is obviously quite a recent feature, the last 2-3 years. Then two other categories. If you have a permanent right to reside, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail in a second, and again, the child is born after that, then the child is British. And then there is a small category of people who, EU citizens who die, for example, retire, permanently unable to work. That's a small category. I'm not going to say anything more about those. So just to repeat, born in this country, if at the time of the birth, one or both parents is British, indefinite leave to remain, has settled status, or has a permanent right to reside, then the child in that case is British. Now, a bit more about this permanent right to reside, which again causes confusion. This doesn't exist anymore. It's a European matter. We're no longer in the EU, so it won't affect anybody from now on. So if one parent has a permanent right to reside at the time of the birth, then the child is British. For those of you who did apply for the permanent right to reside, you'll know that you obtain a card. Now, you don't need a card to decide whether a child is British. So what is the permanent right to reside? It is slightly complicated, but just briefly, what it means is that the EU citizen has worked, that includes being self-employed, or registered as looking for work. That means registered at a job centre and as looking for work. And they've done that, either been working, self-employed, registered and looking for work for a continuous period of 5 years, then that person does have a permanent right to reside, and that then affects the nationality of the child if the child is born after those 5 years. As with settled status, up to 6 months, a year is allowed outside the UK. So a lot to say there. What I would say is, if you're not sure whether your child is British, get advice. We can offer this advice. One of the things we will look at is, at the time of the birth, did you in fact have a permanent right to reside, which then of course decides whether the child is British. Let's assume that, again, just sticking to children, let's assume that a child is not a British citizen at birth. Can the child become a British citizen? Now, there are two routes, and in both cases the word used is registration. So it's registration for a child, and it's called naturalization for an adult, which I will speak about a bit later. The main way in which the child of an EU citizen can become British, registered British, is the following. So the child, again, is born in the UK. Child is under 18 and of good character, roughly means as the child committed criminal offences. And one or both parents, after the birth, same as we talked about before, so after the birth, one or both parents becomes British, obtains indefinite leave to remain, obtains a permanent right of residence, obtains settled status. So it's the birth in this case takes place after some residence status for one of the parents. So emphasize it only needs one of the parents to obtain British citizenship, settled status, etc. Now, we receive quite a lot, I would say probably a dozen inquiries a month, about registration of a child as British. There is a very large fee of just over £1,000, £1,012 at the time of this recording. However, there is a court challenge. This has gone on for some time, but it's now in our Supreme Court, our highest court, and it will certainly be decided this year. I don't have a date for that, I'm afraid. I can't predict what will happen with that court case, but it is possible that the court will decide that the fee is either unlawful. Personally, I think that's unlikely, but they may more likely decide that the fee is too high, that it's excessive. The government would then be forced to reduce the fee. There's no indication that the government would have to return the fee if the court decided it was unlawful. So if you have a child who's not close to 18 and you're considering registering the child as a British citizen, and the commonest way you'll be doing that is because you now have settled status. So you have settled status, child is born in the UK, the child was born before the settled status, you're considering registration. We would advise you to wait the outcome of the court case, because you might save yourself anything up to roughly £1,000. That's a lot of money. If the child is close to 18, so it's certainly 17 and a half, there's no real advantage in waiting, because this court case is only about children. It doesn't talk about fees that are paid after that, after the age of 18. Now you might say, well, how do I find out about this? We have, which I'll talk about at the end, we have an email update which we try to send out every month with news relevant to EU citizens. And one of the things we're following is what's happening with this court case. So as soon as we have a date for the hearing and a date more important for the decision, we will let you know. So towards the end of the talk, I'll give you our details. You can sign up for those updates, and then as soon as we have news, we will inform you. Now, there is another route by which children of EU citizens can be registered as British citizens. This is less common, but I'll just outline it briefly. This is again where the child is born in the UK, but in this case, the application does not have to be made under the age of 18. So that's really the difference. So you have a child approaching 18 or over 18, and the child again was born in the UK, subject to the conditions which I'll just go into. The child may be able to register as British, and you might say, well, couldn't they apply as an adult? Well, they could, because they're over 18, but the requirements are much easier under this route for a child or a young adult than for adults generally using the naturalization process. So again, there is a good character test. I'm not going to say too much about that. It all depends on particular circumstances. We have access to the government guidance on whether offences are serious enough that the government would refuse registration. The important requirement is that the child must have lived in the UK for the first 10 years of their life. So they're born already in the UK, and they must have spent most of the last first 10 years, sorry, of their life in the UK. So that's not a requirement under the first way. That's where a child is born in the UK and one parent gets residence. Under this route, the child is born in the UK and must live here. Absence of about 3 months a year are allowed, but it does mean that absences over that are not going to allow somebody to apply using this route. Again, the fee is the £1,000, but the court challenge is only about applications under 18. So you can apply under this route over 18, but there's no sense in delaying because the court case has nothing to do with adults. Okay, so two routes by which children of EU citizens born in the UK can apply for registration as British citizens. Now, we often get questions that go something like this. I'm an EU citizen, I have settled status, my partner has settled status, we have children. The children have lived in the UK a long time, but they weren't born in the UK. So what's the position then? So we previously talked about being born in the UK. There is a discretion to register a child who is born outside the UK as British, so that it's not an absolute right. And the government guidance says the following. Again, we have this good character test. The child would be expected to have settled status. Now, as many of you will know, children are not exempt from applying for settled status by the end of June. Please emphasize that to any friends or family you have, because we are coming across cases where people seem to think that very young children do not have to apply. They do. So that shouldn't be a difficulty. The child in this case should have settled status. The expectation is that their future life will be in the UK. That is a common test for anybody applying for British citizenship. So the intention is not forever, but your immediate future will be living in this country. And then perhaps most importantly, the expectation is that at least one parent is already British or is applying to be British. Because this is a discretion, it's quite difficult to advise on individual circumstances. It's probably easier if we know the full facts. The government guidance on this is quite long. I've just looked at the main points. So it is possible that a child is likely to be registered, even though born out of the UK, even though they don't meet these requirements. But this is the usual route. Good character, child has settled status, expected to live in the UK, and then at least one parent is already British or applying at the same time to be British. Now that's all I want to say about being born in the UK and being automatically British, or in the case of children. I now want to talk, which is probably the reason you're here, at the question of adults becoming British citizens, and there's a long expression we use called naturalization. The first thing you need to do, really, before looking at any information about British citizenship, is get advice on dual nationality. So that means, does your home country, does your country of birth allow you to have more than one nationality? This is not something we can advise on. We have information about this, but under the terms of our the way we operate, we can only advise on UK law. So we can't advise on foreign law. So what we suggest you do is get advice from your embassy. Many, in fact, EU countries do allow dual nationality, some don't, and some allow it with conditions. The important reason for looking into this is because if your country does not allow dual nationality, or only allows it in circumstances which do not apply to you, then you risk losing your own home nationality, your original nationality. And you need to be aware of the consequences. So you will then not be an EU citizen. You'll be a British citizen. Britain is not now in the EU, as we all know. That means you will not have an automatic right to live, work, study in other EU countries. You may, under each state's individual laws, but you don't have a Europe-wide right to do any of those things. Perhaps even more surprisingly, your rights to even visit your home country will be limited. Under the current rules, British citizens will be allowed 3 months holiday in the Schengen area, which is roughly the EU. And that would then apply to you if you're a British citizen returning to a country which doesn't allow dual nationality. So it does need consideration. So I'm going to move on then and assume that either your home state does allow dual nationality, or that you meet any conditions, or finally that that's not your concern. You decided you do want to go ahead. There are a number, but quite limited, advantages in having British nationality. The main ones are the right to vote in national elections. So we have some elections in London next week, and EU citizens can vote in those elections. So what we're talking about is elections for the UK Parliament, the big election in our country. Secondly, the British citizenship is not lost by absence from the UK. As many of you will know, if you have settled status, that is lost by 5 years absence from the UK, so quite a long time. But if you wanted to spend even a very long time abroad, British citizenship is not lost by absence abroad. And then two other points: to join the armed forces and some very senior jobs in our civil service, government service. Okay, so let's then look at the rules relating to what's called naturalization. So it really applies to adults who can't register, because, as we said, in limited cases, adults can register because they were born in the UK and lived here for the first 10 years. You have to have some kind of resident status for 1 year, unless you are married to a British citizen, in which case you can apply to be British. Immediately you have the resident status. Now, we've been through these names before, just run through them. Indefinite leave to remain, permanent right of residence, but you have to have a residence card, and settled status. So indefinite leave to remain, you will either have a card or a stamp. Permanent right of residence, you will have a card. Settled status, we're all familiar with. So the commonest route will be settled status. So settled status, to repeat, you have to have. If you're not married to a British citizen, you have to wait 1 year. There's no exception to that. You have to wait 1 year from the date on the decision letter, which will be emailed to you. As with children on registration, you have to intend to live in the UK. That doesn't mean forever, but for the foreseeable future, for the reasonable future. That doesn't actually apply to marriage to a British citizen. There is a form which is online. I'm not going to talk about that because forms change. It's called a Form AN. There is, as usual, a fee, which is even higher than the children's fee. It's at present £1,330. And then there are a number of conditions. There are quite a lot of these, so I'll go through them quite slowly. First of all, there is an English language test, which you have to do. If you're over 65 or you have a long-term medical condition, that doesn't apply. There is a form for your doctor to fill up to confirm that there is a long-term medical condition. That's usually straightforward. The English language test has two exceptions. First of all, if you have a degree, a university degree, which was taught in English, so that's not a degree about England, it's not a degree about English literature, it's a degree where the teaching was in English, which would, of course, doesn't have to be in the UK. You could have attended a university in your home country where the teaching for that course was in English. That's the first category. The second category is if you come from a country which is a predominantly English-speaking country. Now, the only two countries listed in the EU are Ireland and Malta. I'll just say a quick word because everything I've said could also apply to a family member of an EU citizen. So we'll take a spouse of an EU citizen who may themselves not be an EU citizen. They might be from Japan or from India or from the United States. So all these conditions again applies to that family member. So you need to check the list of English-speaking countries. Unsurprisingly, the United States counts as an English-speaking country. Other conditions, there is a good character test. There's a lot of detailed government guidance. In fact, it's over 50 pages, which we can, of course, check for you. If you've heard of something called Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, which briefly means that after a certain period of time on job applications, things like that, you do not have to declare a criminal conviction. This does not apply. So you could have an old conviction, which is what's called spent. You don't have to declare it under the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. You still have to declare, and account can be taken of convictions which are old. If you are from Eastern Europe, you'll probably remember that after your country entered the EU, there was a period in which employees were expected to register under something called the Job Registration Scheme. The government does not seem to be applying any breaks of that rule to its naturalisation decisions. There's a lot more to say about technically what is a conviction, what is likely to be ignored, what might be ignored in special circumstances. Again, all depends on the individual circumstances, how long ago the conviction was. We can, of course, look into the particular circumstances in detail after the talk today. There's more, I'm afraid. So in addition to all those requirements, you have to be lawfully resident for 5 years before you apply. It's actually 3 years if you're married to a British citizen. Now, this is not by itself likely to be a great difficulty because, of course, to get settled status, you have to be you have to be resident in the UK for 5 years. In addition, you have to be physically in the UK on the date 5 years before you put the application in. It's, again, slightly less, for 3 years for if you're married to a British citizen. That's one that's often forgotten, so I tend to emphasise that. It's a silly rule, but it cannot be waived. It's in the law. A lot of absences are allowed. I'm not going to actually read them out. They're listed there. So there's quite generous periods of roughly 3 months a year, which you could be out of the UK. There is discretion for absences over these limits. They are very, very complicated. And I would suggest you get advice. This is a regular thing we advise on. And I wouldn't worry too much, because if it happens that your last year, what you were out of the country for too many dates, you might well be able to just wait 1 year and then you're okay. So please get advice if your absences are, over those limits. Now, this is the bit that causes, so it's complicated so far, but it's not likely to cause a problem. You should meet the rules so far, unless you're absent too long from the country, or if there's a question of character, good character. I'll just say a bit of background before I talk about this. Now, when initially the settled status scheme was set up, a lot of information on the government website said that 1 year after getting settled status, EU citizens and their families could apply for British citizenship. Now, that by itself is correct. However, middle and end of last year, it came out that the Home Office were operating the law in a very strict way. And in particular, what they were saying is that residents in the UK of 5 years or 3 years in the case of marriage to a British citizen required lawful residence. And it doesn't mean you committed an offence. What it means is that technically, were you here under the treaties, under the EU treaty, or for Norway, Liechtenstein and Iceland for the EEA treaty. So were you what's called operating under treaty rights. And in addition, the government is saying that because they look at good character over 10 years, were you lawfully resident for 10 years, so beyond the 5 years. The difficulty is going to be periods when somebody is not working. That's going to be one of the difficulties. So I'm going to say, first of all, when there is no problem, because there's a lot of worry and confusion about this. First of all, for any period that you've had indefinite leave to remain, which is, I said 2006 was the cut-off date. So if you have this, you've had that for 14 years, you're okay. For any period you have settled status or pre-settled status, you're okay. Now that's quite recent. At most 2.5 years. So that's going to be a relatively short period, but it does mean that if there's a problem before that, you might be able to just hold off for 1 or 2 years and then apply for naturalization. If you have a permanent right of residence document, from that period on, you are lawfully resident. There is no difficulty. Again, if you have a permanent right of residence without a document, you're okay, but that's slightly complicated. You have to be working, or including self-employment, or registered to look for work for a continuous period of 5 years. But if that's the case, you are lawfully resident not only during the 5 years, but after the 5 years. This also applies to family members. So let's look at the possible areas where this might be a problem. Now, the issue really is that under EU law, students and people who were self-supporting, people who were living on their savings or being supported by somebody else, had to have something called comprehensive sickness insurance. That means private health insurance that covered everything. If you have, this should be on the slide, I apologise. If you had an EHIC card, European Health Insurance card, from your own state, so not from the UK, then that counts as sickness insurance. It's not enough that the UK allowed and has always allowed EU citizens access to the NHS. Ridiculously, that's not enough. Now, what else can we say? Well, the government guidance says that discretion will be exercised. The problem is that's all it says. It doesn't say if the period of you were a student or the period you were self-supporting was a short period, was up to 6 months or 3 months. It doesn't say that. We've, at the moment, this is actually quite a fuzzy area. But I would emphasize it's only relevant if you're relying on a period when basically you didn't have some kind of document, but only the documents are listed. So the permanent right of residence document, indefinite leave to remain, settled status, pre-settled status. Any periods you're working, you never required sickness insurance. Any period you're self-employed, any period you were looking for work and registered for looking for work. So I apologise for this last bit. At the moment, there is uncertainty. What I would say is get advice. We've advised a number of people, and in all but one case, there wasn't an issue. And in the final case, the problem the problem period that the gentleman had was nearly 5 years ago. So if he just waited a short period of time, he would be lawfully in the UK, and then he could apply for naturalisation. There is, the government announced recently some changes to immigration law which do not affect EU citizens. I would be very surprised if some of the EU campaigning organisations did not try to change the law by removing this requirement to take into account health insurance when deciding applications for naturalisation. Again, this is something, if you want to sign up to our email contact list, we can advise you if there are any if there's any likely changes. It's certainly something we will be looking to campaign on and get our local MPs interested in. Just as I finish, here are our contact details. You can, as I've said previously, sign up for monthly email updates, and these are tailored to EU citizens, so you won't receive material about consumer matters or finance. It's only matters relating to EU citizens. You can contact us by phone Monday to Friday, 10 to 4. There's the number. It's a free line. If you can't get through, you'll come through to voicemail, and we aim to clear our voicemails to get back to you. You can also look at our website where we have information available to EU citizens, and you can fill in an email form if you have any inquiries. So you can contact us either by phone or email. It's probably easier to contact us by email because we have all the information from you, and in general we can get back to you quicker. I'm just going to hand over to my colleague who's going to introduce the question session.
So our first question, that's been quite a popular question, Mike, is for absences, is there any special rules allowing longer absences due to COVID where it's been difficult to travel?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes and no. So there is for settled status. I appreciate that's not the subject of today's talk, but there still will be some people who have not applied for settled status. Let me just very briefly talk about this. So for settled status, to get full settled status, you have to be living in the UK for 5 continuous years. However, absences of 6 months, so that's much longer than for naturalisation, absences are allowed. In addition, a single absence of up to 1 year is allowed for good reasons. The government have confirmed that restrictions on travel relating to COVID will be accepted as good reasons. So that's for settled status. Now, for naturalization, that is the rules are completely different. They're set down in law. Now, where I think this could be relevant is the question of absences during the 5 years prior to the application or 3 years of marriage to a British citizen. They're all set out in the slides, but very roughly 90 days a year. Now, what I would say is there's no definite answer to this because that part of the law doesn't say anything about COVID. We would then have to look at the guidance. And again, the guidance doesn't say anything about COVID, but it does say anything, things like medical reasons, things like this. So what I would say is, I'm not dodging the question, it's an interesting question. If that is likely to affect your application for naturalization, roughly, are you out of the country for 1 year or more for more than 90 days, I would say contact us with a list of your absences, the reasons for those absences. We will look at the guidance. The longer the period, the more difficult. COVID is changing all the time. The government changes the rules all the time, but there's no indication they're changing the naturalization rules. So what we'd have to do is look at the existing guidance and see whether your absence, which is usually due to either illness, or it's due to caring, or it's due to restrictions on travel. Those are the 3 reasons we're finding for COVID absences from the UK. So settled status, you shouldn't have a problem. Naturalization, I can't say definitely yes or no. I would say contact us by email with a list of your absences, the reasons for those absences. We will look into this. And then finally, to say that I wouldn't overly worry about this too much. Because you're looking at a relatively short period, hopefully, roughly the last year, as things open up. And if you remember the slide, it's the last year that often causes the problems, the absences during the last year. So it may be that even if the guidance doesn't allow you to forget about your absence from the UK, that a period, you just wait a bit and then apply. So the answer is possibly, but there's nothing definite to say that there is a special rule for COVID absences in the case of naturalisation applications.
Our next question is just in regards to the English test exemption. Yep. For degree level in English. What level of degree is considered? Would a higher education certificate be allowed, or would it need to be a higher degree?
Yeah, I can answer this immediately because I just advised a client on this in the last 2 weeks. I'm sorry, but it's absolutely clear. It does have to be a degree. So not necessarily a bachelor's degree, it could be a master's degree, it could be a further degree, but it's got to be a degree and not a certificate. That is absolutely clear. I'm sorry about that.
And then our next question is, regarding this necessity to have had private health insurance in periods when not working, does that only apply to the last 5 years or any time spent in the UK?
Yes, again, a very good question. Now, you would think that they would be looking at the last, because you have to be lawfully resident in the last 5 years, and you would think that they would apply these rules. But again, just in the autumn, so even later, when they first started talking about this, there was another change. They then started talking about looking at this not just for the period when they're seeing whether you've been in the country enough time, but also looking at your character. I don't know what insurance has got to do with character, but anyway. So they're now saying that usually for character, they're looking at 10 years. So it's actually, you know, if somebody contacted me and said, can you check, is this going to be a problem? I would say what you're going to have to do is list what you were doing. What I mean by that is, you know, what were you doing financially? We're not interested in your hobbies. So what were you doing in the UK for the last 10 years? Yeah, and you list those, and you're particularly looking at periods of studying or periods when you weren't working or being self-employed or looking for work. Okay, those three. So this is not a question, you know, it's very rare I can answer, because we've done this before. I can answer this question for individual circumstances as a webinar like this, because so much of it depends on the individual circumstances. Hopefully, you know, there will be clarification on this, and they'll get rid of this this requirement. You know, as Parliament reopens, there's certainly very shortly going to be some immigration law, and you know, as part of that, I'd be surprised if somebody doesn't propose getting rid of this. So I'm afraid the period you're looking at is actually 10 years, not 5. But it won't apply to most people. Of the dozen or so, probably more than that, people I've spoken to, there was only one case where it was likely to be a problem, and it was a man. For that gentleman, he only had to wait, I think, 2 years at the most, but 1 and a bit years, and then there would not be a problem. So again, we really need detail to advise on this.
Our next question is, how long does it usually take to get British nationality for an EU citizen if they've already got settlement status, assuming that there's all necessary documents at the point of application?
Yes, again, this is a very common question, and it's actually a really difficult one to advise on. Before COVID, which you think about was up to about middle of March last year, the government's target was to make decisions within 6 months. It was usually at the top end, but we normally would say 5 to 6 months. Everything, as you know, has changed. Everything has got slower. Most government departments, people are now working from home, and they don't seem to have the necessary equipment. So it really is not possible to say. Frankly, it's going to be more than 6 months. I've had some applications that went in at the beginning of the COVID period and took about 9 months, so not ridiculously longer, but you will not, you know, get a decision in a few weeks or a few months. Just one other point to say is, in addition to advising on registration and naturalisation applications, providing you fill in as much of the application as you can, because that takes a long time. You know, I'm perfectly willing to check the application and make sure all the documents are correct. The forms are long, but they're not complicated. So I can't give you a more definite answer than that. More than 6 months, it certainly shouldn't be a year. Somewhere in between, as things open up, the backlog will reduce, and the time for decisions should reduce.
So this is just a query that was raised twice. So is a resident card required if you already have settled status, or for an EU citizen with settlement status, assuming, oh sorry, no, that's 2 parts of the same question. So it's just the first part up to the question mark, sorry Mike. So it's just, is a resident card required if you've already got settled status? Yeah,
now again, very, very common question. There was actually a vote in Parliament in December on this. Government, for some reason, wants to move away from residence card. It's this everything digital fashion. and one of the first groups affected, so it's not just EU citizens, but one of the first groups affected were EU citizens under the settled status scheme. So the government is not issuing any kind of card to EU citizens. It's very odd because if you're, for example, the spouse or unmarried partner or civil partner of an EU citizen, but you're not yourself an EU citizen, so for example, you're an American married to somebody who's French, you will already have a card because you have to have one. And that will be renewed. So it's very, very odd. The government say they're gradually moving away from cards. So strictly speaking, your proof of status, because you will have from June, employers and landlords have to check your status. In practice, many other people as well, particularly banks, will want proof of immigration status. In theory, the proof is access to the government website. In reality, a lot of bodies are accepting a printout of the decision letter. So, as you know, you get an email and there's a letter attached. The letter is clearer than the email. And what I would suggest you do is print out a number of copies of that letter. We do a lot of work with local authorities, and this local authority here is accepting the letter as proof of settled status. So just to repeat all that, there is no card, and Parliament actually backed up the government on this. I don't know why. We contacted our local MPs about this in December, so it's not going to change. There is no card. One other thing to say, up till June, your passport is proof of your right to be in the UK. So an employer should accept the password, but the end of June is not far away. After that, strictly speaking, it's allowing the employer to access the government site. In reality, a lot of people are accepting a printout of the letter. So no cards.
Our next question is just going back to the good character test. During the last 10 years, I had a career break. Whilst I have worked continuously during the last 6 years, would I fail the good character test?
I need to know more about this, particularly the dates. So there might be a problem, but let me give one example where it wouldn't be. For example, if somebody had worked for 5 years, and that could be part-time, and they then had a break, and then they worked after that. Well, you would think that would be a problem, but the working for 5 years, that gives you something called permanent right of residence. Don't worry about these words. This category doesn't exist anymore, but it's quite useful. And what it means is that after that, you are lawfully resident. So I would need a bit more detail on this one. So what I suggest that the questioner does, when this session is finished, if you go to our website under the EU section, and it's on the slides as well, if you sign just fill in our email form and just give me a list of what you were doing in the UK, complete list, you know, working, not working, self-employed, career break, etc. And then I can advise you. So I wouldn't say, you know, there's a risk of failing, that it's not clear at all. There are lots and lots of exceptions. It's possible that the questioner, you know, had an EHIC, a European Health Insurance card from their home state, in which case there's no problem. And finally, of course, it's possible the law will change. So there's a lot to advise, and I really wouldn't worry overly about this. But for the particular questioner, I will be delighted to advise if I get that information. You can, of course, phone. The difficulty is quite a lot of information to take in over the phone, so it would actually be easier if you could fill in our email form. That comes straight through to me then, and then I can get back to you within a few days.
Our next question is, in order to apply for British nationality as an EU national's family member from a non-EEA country, would I need to have at least 1 year settled status? After getting settled status, having pre-settled status is not correct, is not enough.
Again, very, very good questions today. Thank you very much. It's unfortunate when the government launched this scheme, they use this horrible phrase, pre-settled status. We get a lot of inquiries from people. They're not clear, we're not clear what exactly they've got, because it's just so easy to think they're the same thing. So I'm afraid the best way to think about pre-settled status is temporary residence. Okay. Whereas settled status is permanent residence, and it's unfortunate that the government decided not to use those words. So to answer the question, pre-settled status, I'm afraid, is not, emphasis, not enough. So please do not apply for British nationality. One, you'll be refused. More importantly, the government will keep the fee. You will lose over £1,300. So what you have to do is you wait until you have full settled status, which means you have to live in the UK for 5 years. And again, assuming you're not married to a British citizen, you then have to wait 1 year. So in reality, it's going to be a minimum of 6 years in the UK.
Okay, Life in the UK test. Where can one apply for the test? Is there a place in Richmond Borough that one can take the test?
You are afraid you would have to test. You would literally have to Google this. There are providers for the test. I'm not aware of a centre in the borough. They are now reopening. We had a lot of problems a few months back when people had. They'd done the language test, the form was ready, but the test was outstanding. So things are now reopening. But perhaps I should have produced a list of the providers. Next time we'll do that. I'm sorry. So, but literally, just if you Google Life in the UK test or any other search engine, there are a lot of people who provide the test.
Okay, and just because I was looking this up slightly earlier, there is now a government, so on the Gov website, there is a search, so you find a local approved provider, just to make sure that it is one that the government does accept. Okay, our next question is, how are absences from the UK being checked?
That's a very good question, actually. Oddly, unless there's something surprising, and I'll come back to that, in the application, the government doesn't seem to check automatically. They don't, for example, ask for proof. Now, the difficulty is, you know, most of these absences are going to be holidays, and it's very difficult to remember dates you've been on holiday. I don't worry about that too much. You know, I was away 2 weeks in June, it's fine. I believe I was away the 8th to the 17th of September. That's absolutely fine. There is space where you can put that. Now, for example, it might be that if you said I was out of the UK in March 2019, you also have to declare your employment. Your job finishes in February 2019 and your next job starts in June 2019, then you might get a question of your absence from the UK. But absences are not, very surprisingly, they're not automatically, there's no automatic checks on this, and people are not automatically asked for proof. Now, you may say that's ridiculous, but you have to be careful here, because, you know, if you either intentionally or not provide the wrong information on your absences, that can be, it's one of the few cases where your nationality can be withdrawn. You know, so settled status could be lost by 5 years absences. Normally nationality, except for very, 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 very serious crimes, terrorist related crimes can't be withdrawn, but naturalization is an application, and if you've broken the terms of the application, your nationality can be withdrawn. So that's all I can say. But there is no automatic check on the dates you've declared in the application.
So in regards to intent to remain in the UK, this is talking about after gaining citizenship,
Yep.
Would there be consequences for any reason you were to leave the UK? So let's say you left the UK to care for family, would there be a penalty, or could you have your citizenship revoked?
That's a good one. It is actually based on intention at the time. It is a good question because, of course, did you have that intention at the time? The application so it doesn't apply in the case of marriage to a British citizen, so that's an exception. I don't know why. Anybody else, it says, is your intention to live and remain in the UK. On the question of I mean, there's certainly no penalty. The question has used the correct word. Revoked means withdrawn, taken back. The government would have to find out that you permanently left the UK. I would actually like to, if we could save this somewhat, I'd actually like to answer this, and then we can include this in the slides. So that, in other words, what is, what are the risks of, if particularly a short time after? So, question of 5 years later, your intention at the time was to remain in the UK. You did remain in the UK. Some years later, you have to leave the UK for a long period to care. That's not going to be a difficulty. The difficulty is you had the intention at the time, shortly after you left for a considerable period. So I would like to check, as always in these talks, there's a limit to how much you can research. So I will look into that, and we'll put it on the website. Thank you for that really good question.
So for days spent outside the UK in the past 5 years, would this include overseas travel as an employee of an organisation, UK based, or is it only private time spent outside of the UK that would be counted?
There are some exemptions. They're quite complicated, but they're very narrow. So if I could just answer the question. So obviously, travel, visiting friends, family, tourism, that is absence. Working abroad by itself, that will also be absence from the UK. There are quite limited exemptions, which again I can put on the website, for working for some official UK government bodies. Quite rare that I've received any inquiries from anybody affected. The best thing is because these exceptions are so narrow, and they're much narrower than settled status, because settled status, as you know, you can have 6 months abroad, but also a 1 year in special circumstances. That includes military service. We know it includes inability to travel due to COVID, as I mentioned earlier. So there are, it's much more open. There are exceptions if you've got very good reasons. That does not apply to the UK. So I will look at the exceptions, but I will warn you, they are very narrow. And the fact that you're working for a UK employer, that is not an exception.
So I have an Irish passport, hence I didn't have to apply for settled status. I've been resident in the UK for 5 years. Do I need to apply, and how do I do so?
Right, so I'm assuming, well, two things. Let's just answer this generally, because we actually get surprising number of Irish people at these webinars and also content here. So just to confirm, an Irish citizen, which will mean if you have an Irish passport, you are an Irish citizen, does not need to apply for settled status. Yeah. The reason is, briefly, because the UK and Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, have an agreement that allows, if you like, the equivalent of free movement. So we have that regardless, separate from the EU. So no need to apply for settled status. Now I'm assuming, so that's still the case. I'm assuming that the questioner is asking about applying for British nationality. So first of all, I mean, you know, the question does not need to apply for British nationality. That's their decision. This is one of the very few countries I know about. My parents were Irish, and Irish nationality is not lost by becoming a British citizen. So you don't have to become a British citizen. I think the questioner might, and sorry, you apply in the same way. This sometimes causes confusion because people say, well, you know, where's my bit of paper to say I've got settled status, etc. Well, you don't have one, but you just put your nationality on the form, and that automatically means that you're resident. Now, just so I'm not missing anything, the question might be asking, you know, has anything changed? Do they need to apply for settled status? No, they don't. So our special agreement between the Irish Republic and the UK is still there. It's completely separate from Brexit, and it means that Irish citizens, you know, do not need to apply for settled status. They are here lawfully after the 30th of June, and neither do they need to apply for naturalization. But if the questioner does want to, then please contact me and we'll go through the details. Thank you.
So what long-term health conditions exempt you from the English tests?
Yeah, there's nothing specified. Well, the law just says over 65 or a long-term health condition. That's all it says. There is a bit of guidance. The difficulty, I've been saying guidance quite a lot. Now, guidance means, you know, things that governments use when they make decisions, but it's not actually law. I don't get many of these. I get quite a few inquiries from people over 65. I've had two recently, and there is a specified form which a GP has to complete. So unless you're getting medical support for the application, then you won't succeed. But I've seen the form, and it does ask for your condition, but it's really then goes on to say, you know, as a result of the condition, would you have a problem in studying for the test, in carrying out the test? Would it make it, you know, much more difficult for you to do the test than for somebody without a health condition? So there's not a specified list. You know, obviously, the more serious the condition, it really is going to depend on your doctor, your medical support. And there is a specified letter which the doctor has to complete, which is on the internet.
I may wish to get another nationality or passport. What are the risks to my British? I'd say if I become a British citizen, what would be the risk to my British nationality if I then applied?
Thank you. Again, very good questions today, and really I probably should have mentioned this to you. So none at all. And the reason is because the UK, Britain does allow a dual or multiple, we say dual nationality, but there are people with 3 or 4 nationalities. So we do allow dual nationality. There's no reason to think that will change. Nobody's arguing for that. So if you have British nationality, you apply for British nationality, and then completely separately from that, you wish to apply for another nationality, then that does not affect your British nationality. But you know, again, back to the first point we made, this is the other way around. You know, if you're applying to country X and country X doesn't allow dual nationality, then you know, you may have to decide drop British nationality or get your new nationality. But normally you're applying for a nationality where another nationality is not a problem. That in the case of Britain, you won't lose your British nationality by applying for a nationality or a passport of another country. Okay, thank you very much indeed. They're really good questions. As I say, we probably missed some of them, so we will make arrangements to have those answered on the website as soon as possible under the EU section.
So thank you very much to everyone who attended our webinar this afternoon, and I hope that you found it useful. Remember that although the webinar is finished now, we are still here for you. We have a special project to help EU citizens in the borough funded by Richmond Council. We can offer you advice only by phone and email at the moment, but details of how to contact us are on the website citizensadvicerichmond.org. The web address is behind me and is behind the other speakers. So please contact us for advice if you need it. Remember, you can also sign up to our mailing list so as you can keep up to date with future events or any developments. Again, details of that are on our website. So finally, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending again, and I'd also like to extend my thanks to my colleagues. Mike for his expert presentation and dealing with all the questions, Bradley for moderating the questions, and behind the scenes David for ensuring that everything runs quite smoothly. And lastly, I'd just like to thank Richmond Council for funding this project and for supporting the work we do with EU citizens. So that's the end of our webinar. Thank you again for attending. Bye-bye.